Hey everyone, it's Eddie Kalegi reminding you that each and every episode of Sports Speak is powered by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a one-stop shop for tickets to concerts, sporting events, and so much more. And now you can use the promo code SportsSpeak on the site to get $20 off your first purchase. So what are you waiting for? SeatGeek. Let there be live. And now on to the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Sports Speak Live, powered by SeatGeek. Promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, $20 off your first online purchase. I'm Eddie Kalegi. Tim Moore dealing with a personal matter. He'll be back next week, but we have a loaded show today. College basketball selection Sunday. Later in the show, we'll have Ellis, Gordon, Alec, Crouthamel on the show to break everything down. The bracket will be out, all 68 teams. It's going to be difficult to pinpoint who the best teams are. Really strong bubble this year. Some good teams getting left out. A lot of debate about who can really contend. Three elite teams in UConn, Purdue, and Houston, who have all shown some vulnerabilities this season as well. So going to be a lot that we can dive into there. But it's been a dramatic week in the NFL world with free agency beginning, quarterbacks moving all over the place, and Rahill Jaiswal is here with us to break it all down. So as an Eagle fan, I know where we need to start here as I see the Giants flag right behind you. Mr. Barkley going from New York to Philly, doesn't really have to relocate, just a little hour and a half drive, and he will now be donning the green. Of course, played in Pennsylvania for Penn State to start his college career, but of course, last 6 seasons with the Giants, now goes to the Eagles. Now, as an Eagle fan, I think there are some that are completely overreacting about how good this move is. I like DeAndre Swift on the team last year. I personally think Saquon Barkley is extremely overrated, especially at this stage of his career, because he's never been able to stay healthy. He's not the best pass catcher in terms of getting separation. He's a good power back, and I like that aspect of him. And he does have the ability to take over games, but I think those are becoming fewer and far between as he enters year 7 of his career. And of course, NFL running backs, they'll play 2 years and then people say they're washed. And Saquon Barkley is one of the older ones in the league. But of course, it's still very enjoyable as an Eagle fan to see all of these Giants fans lose their minds. You know, you decide to franchise tag Saquon last year and give Daniel Jones the big bucks, and then doesn't even get a contract offer this season. So he goes to a rival, doesn't really say much, and then has the half-hearted thank you note 4 days later for Giants fans on Twitter. So gut reaction for you as a Giant fan on the Saquon move and how you feel it potentially benefits the Eagles.
All right, here we go. All right,
Big
I've
step. I can tell you're
I've suppressed these for the last 2 days, but it's like a pop when it's all gonna come out here. So I have no issue normally with players taking the most money. I understand that loyalty in sports does not exist anymore. We both know that it's a business. And Eddie, I completely agree with you from an Eagles standpoint. Is I was shocked they gave him this deal because I don't really know how much of an upgrade he is. Saquon Barkley in totality is to DeAndre Swift. I mean, the Eagles don't run the ball as much anyway, so he's not going to get 25, 30 touches like he did in New York, but he's going to be running behind a good offensive line. So let's start. So back to my main point. I have no issue with players taking more money. I understand it's a business. What really pisses me off is that not last season, the Giants offered Saquon Barkley $13 million per year. Now, the guaranteed money in Philly was a little more. Reports are saying guarantees in New York were like $22 to $23 million. He wanted $25 million, so he didn't sign the deal. $2 million in NFL terms, when it comes to contracts, is not that much money. Now, I know to us that's a lot of money, but in terms of grand schemes, NFL, any pro sports contract, $2 million is not that much money. So if Saquon Barkley really wanted to be a Giant for life, he could have taken that $2 million small cut and still signed the deal and been handsomely paid. So my issue is, why did you have to lie to the fan base for that whole process saying you wanted to be a Giant for life? All you had to say was, I would love to stay in New York, but the money has to be right. I have no issue with him taking the money. Does it suck that it's Philadelphia? But I understand Philadelphia gave him the most money. There was no reason to lie for 2 years saying you wanted to be a Giant for life. And also, going back to the people who are saying, oh, Giants fans are overreacting. Just put ourselves, how would you feel if this happened to your franchise? How would you feel, Bills fans, if this same thing's happened with Stephon Diggs and he went to the Patriots or he went to the Jets? Flipping the motto, Jets fans, how would you feel if this happened to Brees with Brees Hall? Let's say he did this and then he went to the Bills. You'd be feeling some type of way. You would be feeling some type of way. So all these people who are saying stop overreacting, there's a reason why it hurts. And if you were in the exact same position, you'd be saying the exact same things. And you know what makes me the most angry about all of this is everyone's reaction on Twitter saying, "Oh, well, you didn't offer him a contract. Oh, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that." Saquon Barkley was more than handsomely paid in his time in New York. All right? Let's stop acting like the Giants did him dirty his whole time in New York. When he signed his rookie deal, it was a 4-year, $32 million contract. That was the most money at the time for a rookie running back in NFL history. So he got the biggest deal of any rookie running back at the time. But we're going to act like the franchise disrespected him right off the bat, even though they took him as at number 2 overall, which hadn't been seen since Adrian Peterson. And oh, by the way, how much money did this man make off FanDuel? All his deals with FanDuel, Skim Milk, everything, all the sponsorships, Hulu, every ad I see it's him and Damian Lillard up on Hulu. So stop acting like this man wasn't paid at all, because that's just not true. And second of all, here's the other thing. People are saying, well, the Giants didn't offer him a contract. Well, the reports come out that the reason they didn't offer him a contract is they were never going to go that high in the first place. And as soon as that deal came in from Philly, it was over. So there was no point offering him a contract. The Giants could have offered him any contract. He would have said no. It was clear he was taking the most money. Why would Joe Schoen waste his time with trying to deal with Saquon Barkley when he knows he's out he's out the door? That's just not smart. Turn your attention to other stuff. And I like what the Giants did with their offensive line help. So and then another thing. One last thing. When people will say, "Oh, well, this is what you deserve because you gave Daniel Jones $40 million." That is not the case. Look at the reports. The whole reports for the Giants' plan was franchise tag Daniel Jones and get Saquon to a large deal. The Giants offered him 3 contracts, Eddie. 3 different ones. The first one he said no to, they went higher. The second one he said no to, they went higher again. And he still turned them down. The Giants offered Saquon Barkley 3 contracts before they even got to Daniel Jones's money. But the issue was Saquon wasn't willing to sign the deal, so you had to give Daniel Jones your money. Now, we can talk about whether we all know he didn't deserve $40 million, but that's why they gave him the contract, because they knew Saquon Barkley wasn't going to sign. And you can't put 2 players on a franchise tag. You can only do one of them. So they realized the deal was over with, so they signed Daniel Jones and they franchised Saquon in the hope that they get the deal done. And also, one more thing. The Giants could have tagged him again. Let's not forget this. If they really wanted to play lowball with the man, they could have tagged him again, and we would have had an Austin Eckler, Le'Veon Bell sitting out situation. But they respected him enough to put him on the non-exclusive franchise tag, which meant he can go negotiate with other teams and see if they can match their offer. So they gave him the chance to go get his money. So stop acting like the franchise lowballed him for 7 years. The franchise put everything they had into this man. They drafted him number 2 overall. They signed him to the most money for a rookie, for a running back, and they let him negotiate his own deals with other teams. There's no reason, and there's people saying all over the place, stop making up this fake, fictitious narrative about being upset. Again, I'll challenge any other fan in sports. Put yourself in their shoes. Let's say this happened with your favorite team. See how you'd be reacting to it, especially considering you went to a division rival in Philadelphia. And now I don't want to get into the whole Tiki Barber thing, because I think Tiki Barber's the last person to talk about loyalty and, all that stuff, because the Giants franchise hates the man. He might be the greatest running back in NFL history, in Giants history, but the franchise does not respect Tiki Barber. So I don't want to get into the whole beef with him and Saquon putting out the half-noted apology. I do believe that partially it was real, just because Saquon Barkley is not the type of guy to beef with someone on Twitter. We've seen that. Saquon Barkley is not Twitter fingers like a Micah Parsons or someone else. So I do believe him in that. He signed the deal. Let's go with it. We'll see how he does in Philadelphia. I think he'll be fine. But like you said, as far as his contract goes for the Eagles, it doesn't make much sense to me. But that's all I got to say. I mean, it just blows my mind how brain dead and tunnel vision people can be without looking at the whole circumstances with this deal. It was a mess from the start. The franchise did everything they could to keep this man, but it's clear he didn't want to stay. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, my whole thing too is like I think Giants fans, I mean, I assume you, but I feel like the rest of the fan base also had to see the warning signs all the way back more than a
Oh,
year ago.
100%.
Definitely didn't want to.
As soon
Yeah.
as they couldn't get that deal done and they had to put him on the tag and they put him on the non-exclusive tag, you were thinking that this is probably not going to work out. As soon as they did not reach the deal by 4 p.m., most Giants fans knew it was not looking good.
Yeah, it's like there was really no shock value here. The shock value, I guess, was that he went to a division rival, and that sucks for Giants fans. But again, as we've seen, this has actually been a trend throughout this year's free agency with people going to division rivals, and this isn't necessarily unprecedented. But I do agree with you. If I was in the same boat as an Eagle fan and I see a elite player like, years ago at Jason Kelsey go to Dallas or something, I'd feel the same way. But, again, I think Saquon Barkley, like as an Eagle fan, I like the move, but at the same time, I've thought Saquon Barkley has been overrated his entire career. I don't think he's that talented. I really don't. And he gets hurt all the time. And he's not that good of a pass catcher. He's kind of a back of the past. He's not that fast. Like
He's
he's had
lost his speed since the
yeah,
ACL tear, yes.
yeah, he's not as explosive as he first was. And frankly, I mean, besides the first couple of years, he hasn't really been that explosive. What he was really good during was when he was able to stay healthy in 2022. And we saw how that helped lift the Giants. And I think did more for that team than what Daniel Jones did for that team on the offensive side to get them to the playoffs. So we'll see how he works into the Eagles system. I think the real question now, with no Jason Kelsey, the Eagles offensive line is going to take a little bit of a step back. And then you got the real question here. Ball's at the 1 yard line. Now you got a power back. Are you going to let Jalen Hurts try to be pushed in or jump in, or do you use Saquon to try to score the touchdown? So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. But Saquon Barkley goes from New York to Philly. He also had that edit ready to go as soon as the signing,
Oh, yeah.
which was very funny. But Saquon's an Eagle. Let's talk about the quarterback moves. Biggest one, we talked about it last week, Russell Wilson. He had that exploratory meeting with the Giants, but it seemed like the stars had aligned for him to go to Pittsburgh. That's what happens, and the Steelers have essentially tripled down on him being their guy. They let Mason Rudolph go, they let Mitch Trubisky go, and then they trade Kenny Pickett to the Eagles to be their backup. And Russell Wilson currently is the only quarterback on the Steelers roster. It feels like it could be a good fit for Russ, but at the same time, he has fallen off and fallen hard the last 2 years. Rock bottom being Patrick Starr calling his interception from Bobby Wagner in the Christmas game that time when they lost by 40 to Baker. I don't think Russell Wilson has much left in the tank, but I think a switch to Pittsburgh could help him at some level. And I think that's a good group for him to be with. He's got a couple of decent running backs. He's got Pickens. Deontay Johnson is gone, but he's a head case. He clearly didn't want to be there. He's got Freiermuth. He's got a good tight end. And this is a Steelers team with a really, really strong defense. And of course, Russell Wilson, most of his career, had a really, really strong defense in Seattle. So I don't think it's the worst move. I think from Pittsburgh's standpoint, needed to pivot away from Kenny Pickett. Clearly wasn't the answer. Clearly haven't had the answer at quarterback since about 6 years ago when Big Ben was still in his prime. The Steelers needed to do something, and I think Russell Wilson kind of fits that mold.
Yeah, 100%. I think Russell Wilson is a good fit in Pittsburgh. In that, like you said, it's partially they can do some of the things he did in Seattle, right? I mean, even towards the end of his career in Seattle with the whole let Russ cook thing, he made some mistakes, threw a lot of interceptions. The Russ is at his best when he has a good defense. You can run the football, and then he can still make his off scramble plays. Now he's lost a little bit of mobility, but I still think Russell Wilson is more than capable of making scramble plays. We saw him do it against the Bills earlier this year when they went on that win streak. So overall, I think it's a solid fit. And again, Pittsburgh is not. I mean, Pittsburgh, I don't think was going into the portal to get a new quarterback anyway. And it's clear that Kenny Pickett, he didn't want to be the backup. He didn't want to be on the roster unless he was a starter. He didn't play well enough to keep that job. They're going to trade him. I think Russell Wilson can be much smarter than Kenny Pickett. And again, it's going to be a motto of just don't turn the football over. Methodically move us down the field and let our defense do the rest, because that's how Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh. It's the defense. So overall, I think it'll be a solid fit for Russell Wilson, but we'll see where they go 2 to 3 years after this when Wilson is completely done. I feel like he's got 2 more seasons, maybe 3 at max, where he can play at a pretty good level. Otherwise, but we'll see where they go from after that point where Russ is completely done.
Another older quarterback that had a location switch, Kirk Cousins, who somehow, I don't know what he does when he goes into these meetings, but he's
His
going to end
agent,
up with
his
like
agent,
$400
man.
million guaranteed in his career. Another ludicrous contract, this time with the Falcons, which I think, at least for the next year or two, this could really work out. But this is someone, again, coming off of a torn Achilles that has one playoff win in his career. And the Falcons, I mean, another team that needed a pivot at quarterback is Desmond Ridder. Clearly wasn't the answer, but yeah, he was awful. Kirk Cousins was really good at the beginning of last season and really good the year before that, and has been consistently good throughout his career, but is 36 years old and gets more than $100 million guaranteed. And then they paid Darnell Mooney $39 million. They gave $140 million guaranteed to Kirk Cousins and Darnell Mooney. It does not make much sense to me. I know the Falcons' offense was a mess last year with Arthur Smith, but they have young weapons. All they needed was the quarterback. I didn't really understand Mooney, but they gave a lot of money to Kirk Cousins, someone coming off of Achilles injury, who's going to be 40 years old once this contract runs out. And I think this is really good for the Falcons next year. We know the NFC still quarterback wise isn't very deep, and the NFC South has the Panthers and the Saints, who I think are both complete messes, and it's really between the Falcons and the Bucks. And this can really help elevate Atlanta. The weapons are in place. Bijan Robinson is a real talent. Drake London is good. I know Kyle Pitts has had some problems, but maybe with a, you know, good quarterback, he can actually make things happen. But I think Kirk Cousins, I've always been high on Kirk Cousins. I think he's a borderline top 10, top 12 quarterback in the NFL, but it's a lot of money for someone who's coming off of a season ending injury.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. I mean, it's too much money, obviously, but I credit to his agent. I don't know how he's gotten these contracts, but I mean, it's the nature of the quarterback market, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I like this move for the Falcons. I like them signing Kirk Cousins. Now, granted, not for the contract they gave him, but I mean, before his Achilles tear, going back to the beginning of the season and the season before that, I mean, I thought he was playing the best football of his career. Just in general, the way he was playing with the Vikings was unbelievable. The season, even though they lost the Giants in the wild card round, he had a great season then. He was starting to pick it up. The Vikings were starting to find their rhythm before he got hurt. And unfortunately, as soon as they were looked like they were ready to go and get to that top level again, he tore his Achilles. So that was tough to see. But overall, I like the deal. Like you said, Eddie, I mean, let's look at the quarterbacks in the NFC. I mean, outside of Jalen Hurts, who probably still the clear cut number one, even after a down year. Matthew Stafford, there's not like I can't really name anyone else. Then you can throw Dak, Baker. You can throw those guys in the mix, but there's a clear drop off compared to the guys in the AFC. I mean, there's no reason why Kirk Cousins can't be the second best quarterback in the conference. I mean, because I still think Jalen Hurts, even though he had down years, levels above everyone else in that conference. But there's no reason why he can't be thrown in there with a Matthew Stafford-esque. I love Stafford, maybe a little below Stafford. There's no reason he can't be thrown into that third best quarterback in the NFC. And you talk about how weak that division is. I mean, Falcons got a great defense and they've got playmakers. Now you got a quarterback who can actually play. Desmond Ridder, I think, was rated the worst quarterback like in the entire NFL. And they still won 7 games. So they can still win football games just based on their defense. So now you've got Bijan Robinson in the backfield, who is a stud. Drake London, who is a stud. Kyle Pitts, I'm still pretty high on Kyle Pitts if you can get him the football. Desmond Ridder just couldn't get him the football. So, I mean, that's a good offense. I mean, those are some great playmakers, and you've got a good defense. I mean, there's no reason why the Falcons can't win, 9, 10 games and win this division. It's clearly a 2-horse race between them and the Bucks. Maybe you'd lean the Bucks just because Kirk Cousins going into a completely new system. But I mean, it should be a competition for that division. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Falcons win 10 games and win that division title.
Yeah, I agree with you. And their defense did start to step up towards the second half of last year, too. So maybe that's a building block into 2024. Couple other moves I want to just touch on and get your thoughts on, and maybe some other under the radar moves that I might forget. A couple ones that I think are really good that are not being talked about that much. Patrick Queen going to the Steelers Ravens lose a big piece on that defense, which I think is going to make things. Ravens did not have a good free agent week, to be completely honest. And I know they got Derrick Henry. I think the Derrick Henry Lamar Jackson combination is a little weird in that backfield. I know Derrick Henry's a power guy and Lamar's with the speed, but I don't know. That offense becomes even more one dimensional with the run game now. And Henry definitely has had a drop off as of late. Maybe the scenery change helps him out, but I don't know about that one. And then they lose Patrick Queen on defense to a division rival. So big move there with the Ravens. The Texans bringing in Joe Mixon. I don't know what the Bengals are doing right now. I mean, now T. Higgins wants to leave, and the whole thing with the trade request simultaneously. They release Joe Mixon, and then he just goes to Houston instead, and they don't have any sort of an upgrade in that backfield from Mixon. So I don't really understand what Cincinnati was doing. They're a team that is expected to be contenders this year again with Joe Burrow back healthy, but I really think they've taken a major step back. So Cincinnati and Baltimore with bad weeks. And then the Commanders, I don't know what's going on there with these moves. So they trade away Sam Howell. I know Tim's going to have a field day with that next time because he's now going to be Geno Smith's backup in Seattle. But, you know, you're bringing Marcus Mariota, who looks 60 years old, even though he's 30. They add Austin Eckler, who's clearly been on the downturn the last couple of years. They did bolster their O line and their secondary, which they needed to do, but the Commanders had so much available money. They've spent so much of it, and the roster really doesn't look that much better, which is emblematic of what's been the case for the Commanders for years now. So I didn't really understand those moves. Jimmy G becomes a backup with the Rams, which is interesting. Gardner Minshew goes to Vegas. Obviously, last year completes that screen pass on fourth down and could have made the playoffs and kept CJ Stroud and the Texans out of the postseason in that Week 18 game with the Colts. So I really like Minshew getting a chance with Vegas potentially to try to win that starting job, depending on what they do if they draft a quarterback, and they still have Aiden O'Connell on their roster too. So those were a few moves that aren't getting talked about enough. Of course, we touched on three of the bigger ones. How do you feel about some of those, and what are some other maybe hard-hitting moves that could really be impacts heading into the 2024 season that haven't been discussed enough over the last week?
Yeah, the Patrick Queen loss really is a rough one. The Ravens defense took a pretty big hit. I mean, that was a Ravens secondary that was the best in football. They led the league in interceptions. They were all over the place. So the Ravens defense really took a hit this offseason. I'm interested more in see kind of, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but what the deal with the Packers was with the whole Aaron Jones thing. I mean, one minute they're restructuring his contract and they're ready for a new deal, and the next minute they release him. I mean, that was really weird. And I don't know why they didn't keep Aaron Jones. Why didn't you give him a decent contract? I mean, you would have had the best running back duo in the NFL, Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones. Now, maybe they thought that there was no way to split the carries between the two of them. So it's just best to let Aaron Jones go and roll with Josh Jacobs forward, who was unbelievable last season, was maybe the best running back in football last year. But I do like also what they've done in the secondary. Heartbroken to see Xavier McKinney go. It might be a little bit of an overpay, $17 million, but I'm so high on Xavier McKinney. He was really good for the Giants last year, especially toward the second half of the season. He's got big play potential, maybe top five, upper echelon cornerbacks, safeties in the NFL. And they needed all the defensive help they can get, especially back there in the secondary. So that was a really good move for them. But I'm just more interested in what they were doing with the whole Aaron Jones situation. That really made no sense. And of course, as soon as he gets released, he goes to the Vikings. Like, we all knew it was written in the stars after he got released, he was going to go to Minnesota. But just really weird as to why you would release him. It was just so weird. 1 minute they're working on a new deal, it instantly falls through, and then they just cut ties with him completely.
And Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones, two of the top 10 backs in the league, both getting released by their teams that made big runs in the postseason the last couple of years, didn't make much sense. Before we finish this segment, it's funny how we were talking about the Steelers tripling down on Russell Wilson being their starting quarterback. We're recording this on Saturday evening, which means we just had breaking news. Justin Fields is a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Did they just trade for him?
Yes,
I have my
Justin Fields
notifications off.
from the Bears to the Steelers for a 2025 conditional pick. That's a sixth right now, improves to a fourth if Fields plays, and I believe half the games. But
so there's their insurance plan after Russell Wilson, I guess.
interesting move, which ensures now that the Chicago Bears will be taking a quarterback and will be taking Caleb Williams next month. So Justin Fields goes to the Steelers, and we get to break some news here on SportsSpeak, even though, well, this is being posted on Monday, so it's not really going to be breaking news anymore. But it's still pretty cool when that happens. But yeah, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson now, the quarterback room in Pittsburgh. And it's just crazy. There's been like 15 starting caliber quarterbacks who have been on the move over the
Yeah.
last couple of
Yeah,
weeks.
but I do partially like that move. I think Russell Wilson could be a very good mentor to Justin
Yeah.
Fields. They share a lot of similarities. Obviously, Wilson is not as athletic as Justin Fields, and even though Wilson could scramble, it's nothing compared to what Justin Fields can do. But that's two similar kind of scrambling styles. Maybe you can say Fields is runs a little more, but very similar kind of. You can see the similarities in their game, so it makes sense that they have Russell Wilson, and I don't think Wilson's going to have any problem with mentoring Fields over the next couple of years. So, yeah, and again, even after the Steelers should be stable enough once Russell Wilson has gone to where Justin Fields is not in a completely horrible situation like it was in Chicago. So that does
Yeah,
actually make a little bit of sense. That makes sense.
definitely. So the Steelers now have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as their quarterbacks. There will definitely be more to touch on, but the big moves have happened now. Those dominoes have fallen, and the draft is just over a month away. Thanks to Rahill Jaiswal for joining us. Let's transition into our college basketball segment with Ellis Gordon and Alec Crouthamel. Well, continuing here on Sports Speak Live, a little of a vibe switch here from NFL free agency to March Madness. The bracket is out and it's time to discuss. And what better way than to have two guys who really know the world of college basketball well, Ellis Gordon and Alec Crouthamel. Alec, I mean, is constantly tweeting about college basketball. He knows pretty much everything. He was watching Caitlin Clark in Aruba last week. So he definitely is a ball knower, as is Ellis. And some people who might not be ball knowers are the selection committee. And let's dive into that first. A lot of controversy, and I'll qualify what I'm about to say with this. This was not an easy bracket to put together this year more than any other with the bid stealers that came in the final few days. I think it ended up being 19 number one seeds going down in conference tournaments. And then you get these surprises. NC State wins 5 games in 5 days. They have more wins at Capital One Arena than the Washington Wizards have this entire season, and that's their home arena. Oregon does one of those things again where they're not a tournament team and then they win the Pac-12. UAB steals a bid, and then for some reason FAU gets in the field. But of course, the real debate here is what happened with the bubble. So Boise State and Colorado State, both kind of controversially, especially Boise State, fall into the last 4 in, but they do make the field. Virginia, who lost to NC State, didn't have that many great wins on their resume, frankly, this year. They get in over 3 Big East bubble teams, including Seton Hall, who ironically miss it because of a loss to Rutgers, and Rutgers missed last year because of a loss to Seton Hall. Rick Pitino's St. John's, who you knew was going to be a big ratings get, they missed out of the NCAA tournament, and then they refused to participate in the NIT. And Providence, which I don't think had as big of a case, but a good storyline with Devin Carter. And Indiana State, too, who was top 30 in net, the highest rated team in the net rankings ever to miss the NCAA tournament. Alec, I'll go to you first. What's your biggest gripe with this NCAA tournament field, and how much of this did the selection committee truly get right?
I think my biggest gripe has been 2 things. One, the fact that Michigan State and Florida Atlantic were able to stay on the 8-9 line, and I'll lump them in with Virginia too for them being as high as they were. I don't think they should have made it either. Michigan State, I could argue, shouldn't have made it either. Florida Atlantic, I could argue the same. And then another thing, the Mountain West getting as disrespected as they were. Granted, all the teams got into the tournament, but the fact that a lot of them were as low as they were. I mean, New Mexico, according to the selection committee chair, would not have even made the tournament had they not won the Mountain West. The fact that Colorado State was the last team in, the fact that Boise State is playing in Dayton, it just feels like they did not value that conference high enough. And then obviously Indiana State getting left out is unfortunate because they've become kind of a cult hero this season in college basketball. But the fact that they were like you said, the highest rated team in the net to not make the tournament is very surprising. I thought they should have made it in. I feel like they got it right for the most part, but there were just clumps of decisions that like there's a lot of teams that felt a little off in terms of their seeding, but they were kind of clumped into just one mindset. Just like a couple of those just kind of didn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, there was some confusion. And you mentioned the Mountain West. I mean, at the very least, I know there's a couple of them might have been underseeded, but at least they got 6 teams into the field. And I feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy here. I got to throw the glasses on. It's time for an education session right now. If the Mountain West with 6 teams is able to get in when they're quote unquote beating up on each other, how does the Big East, which is considered the second best conference in college basketball this year statistically, not get more than 3 teams in when, frankly, what did they do all year? They beat up on each other. The last week at Madison Square Garden again proved the quality of that conference. Seton Hall, I think, is 100% a tournament team. St. John's, I'm not as high on, neither with Providence, but at the very least, I think if there was one thing that should have been done, Seton Hall should have been in that field over Virginia, and that didn't happen. If I had my way, I think the 3 biggest adjustments that needed to be made were Seton Hall over Virginia, move Boise State out of the first 4, and shift Michigan State to the first 4. And I don't understand how Gonzaga and St. Mary's can be on the same seed line. They're both 5 seeds from the WCC. St. Mary's proved all season and again in the WCC championship why they are the best team in that conference. Ellis, your thoughts on how the selection committee did this year?
I mean, it was, as you said, it was such a hard job, but they did get a good amount wrong. There'll always be debate. My real issue with the selection committee is after they go on their big, after they make their picks, they go on their big press tour where they explain everything. And every year they flip flop on things that they explain. Like some things like out of conference schedule, they say consistent on, but a lot of the metrics, like you can go back and cross check them, and like they flip flop on things they say every single time, because it would be more transparent if they're like it's vibes, because a lot of it is because they flip flop on their reasoning every single year, which sucks. But and I do think it was a really hard bracket to fill out, but they didn't do great. For example, the Mountain West. Then say the committee says, yeah, we really value out of conference, right? Because they clearly did not value the Mountain West in conference, but they say we really value out of conference. Well, the Mountain West was the only conference where every team had a winning record in out of conference play. So shouldn't that, by that logic, mean that Mountain West teams get a little bump up in stature if you value out of conference so much? And obviously the Big East teams, Virginia, you say like they were playing horrible, and their metrics were slowly going down. I know they technically don't look at net and KenPom like that, which people don't really realize, which is something. But still, their metrics are slowly going down. How can you keep them out of a Seton Hall team? And you say injury, right? You say injury. Well, Seton Hall, 2 of their big losses were without Kadari Richmond, right? How can you say injuries matter and then keep Seton Hall out over Virginia, who was fully healthy for most of the season? Or Providence is the same thing, right? You say injuries matter. Well, their first 4 losses, their 4-game losing streak came right after they lost Bryce Hopkins, and then they were able to adjust. So that's my issue with the selection committee. The fact that, well, the real thing is it's an imperfect process, and we all know this. But the selection committee likes to pretend it's a perfect process, and they have this formula. Well, they don't. And then they trot out this PR tour where they're like, we have this formula, it works. But the formula that they trot out every year changes. And that's okay. And they have made mistakes, and I think that's okay to admit. But I just hate the PR campaign they always go on after their picks. But overall, I think they did a good enough job for how hard it was. I do believe that, even though they did make some mistakes, like Gonzaga and St. Mary's being on the same seed line, many of the stuff that you mentioned.
Yeah, but I think the critical thing, specifically the first 4 seed lines, they did a pretty good job with. There's a couple of questionable spots when you start ranking the people at each seed line, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think overall, they did about all that they could do. But let's focus in on what the bracket actually is. If you want to check out a great podcast, Ellis Gordon does the Who's on Top podcast. We just spent the last 2 hours and pretty much went through the entire bracket there. But we might as well dive into what we're seeing in the rest of the bracket. In post-production, I'll throw a graphic up on here with the bracket. But let's start with that East region. I kind of want to go through this with, teams that could be underrated, teams that might be a little overrated, and then go from there. In that East region, UConn, of course, the #1 overall seed, I think proved that they are the best team in college basketball this year with what they did in their conference tournament. Houston, UNC, Purdue, they all fall in their respective conference tournaments. UConn does it, and John Fanta brought this up. They find multiple ways to win. Semifinal, 95-90 shootout with St. John's. Then it's a rock fight with Marquette the next day, and they win that game by 16 points. UConn is clearly the most lethal team, but I think they're, Ellis, in the most lethal region. Iowa State, a 2 seed, could have been argued potentially for a 1 seed with the way they closed the season. And I'm surprised they weren't considered as the top 2 seed. I think they should be considered the 5th best team in the country going into this tournament. Plus, you've got Illinois with Terrence Shannon, who was lights out in the Big Ten tournament. You got to see that firsthand. Auburn's in that region, San Diego State, BYU. It's going to be a tough road for UConn, as talented as they are.
Yeah, they really got, it's funny because, theoretically, the number 1 seed of all time, as you said, of the year, gets the easiest road. But looking at it now, I really think they have the hardest road. I really do. It's definitely not that. I mean, Purdue and UNC definitely have the easiest roads. You can make a case Houston has a harder road, but I think UConn has to be pretty. I mean, they're UConn. They're not going to care. They're the best team. Dan Hurley's not going to be thinking about this that much. But I think as a UConn fan, you really got to be upset because Iowa State, they should not have to play. I mean, you mentioned it, and it's going to be hard for them to go back to back because let's be honest. They were fantastic last year. They're going to win the national title no matter who they played. And I don't want to say they played cupcakes because they made it, even though they made them look like it was a cupcake schedule, it wasn't. But they had a relatively, compared to other national title winners, they had a relatively easier road to the NCAA, to the national title, right? And then they played, of course, San Diego State, which wasn't the best competition in the national title game. So there's that. I don't want to disparage what they did last year. They probably would have won no matter what. But there's that. This year, they got the opposite. And so something that gets overlooked in the NCAA tournament is matchups because how easy is it every matchup? And I think I'd be a little nervous if I was a UConn fan. That said, this team is just so dominant, it may not matter. Any other team, I'd be freaking out. Like if this was Purdue in that seed line, I'd be freaking out. UNC, I'd be freaking out. Houston, a little less so, but still, UConn may be so dominant, it won't matter. And if they go back to back, without a doubt, one of the best 2-year runs of all time. Maybe even better than Florida 08-09. Sorry, Billy Donovan.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you got to take that into consideration as being a historic 2-year run in college basketball. To me, this region, though, despite UConn having to be battle tested, Alec, I think this is a pretty self-explanatory region, and I think the better seeds are going to prevail most of the way. In my bracket, my one surprise team, I really like BYU. They're in a Big 12 conference that I think gets a bad rap because of the non-conference strength of schedule, when in reality, there are quality teams there, and BYU has made the pivot from the WCC to the Big 12 almost flawlessly, and they have had an excellent 2023-24 season. I actually have them upsetting Illinois. I think that Terrence Shannon, as good as he was, I think the Illini are going to be riding a little too much of a high from their Big Ten championship. And besides Tom Izzo, no Big Ten coach has been able to consistently crack the code of making it to the second weekend. And Brad Underwood has historically struggled in getting Illinois to that third round, even when they've been a top 10 team in the country. So I think BYU could be a surprise team. Iowa State is really good, but I think this carves right through and UConn is able to make it to the Final Four.
Yeah, I'm mostly with you there, especially with the BYU pick. But I do think Iowa State is just going to be able to just take this game from UConn in the Elite Eight, should it happen, which I'm thinking it will. I think there's going to be one day this tournament where they finally get the threes to fall. They don't shoot threes at a very high volume or efficiency, but I think against UConn, they're going to be playing their best game. I think the defense can step up too. And I think UConn, they are so dominant in so many different ways, but that kind of hurts them in that, if something goes wrong, maybe you don't really know where to turn to. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but I think Iowa State has the firepower to do it. I think they have the will to do it, and I think they will be the surprise victor out of the East region. Now, granted, I did say on this very podcast last year that they're going to lose in the first round to Iona, so maybe take my UConn opinions with a grain of salt from now on, but I don't know. I just see something with this Iowa State team.
You're a bit of a hater. But I do agree. I think the two teams that can give UConn the best matchup that doesn't require like just being an absolute heater, right? Like the two teams that schematically match up the best. Like obviously we knew Creighton blew them out, but that was just because they couldn't miss. taking that aside, it's Iowa State, it's Houston, right? And they won't have to worry about Houston until the championship game, theoretically, but they got to play Iowa State in the Elite Eight. And I think if Iowa State can just be hitting their shot, have a day where they're hitting their shots, this is a defense, because UConn wears you down. But Iowa State and Houston's defense, they're not going to get worn down by anyone, even UConn. So I think it's a little lucky. I can see. I mean, in our bracket, I predicted Iowa State to win. I think I'm gonna do that too. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm still going to roll with UConn. I think I got to stick with the heater. They have 5 elite players: Newton, Castle, Spencer, Caravan, and Klingon. And I think that group comes together. Despite as good as Iowa State has looked this year, it's unfortunate because I think if the Cyclones were in another region, they'd have a pretty easy path to the Final Four. And it's unfortunate for them because even as a 2 seed, they kind of got the bad luck of the draw here, having to go against UConn in the same region. But it's funny, the top half of the bracket, I feel like, is so much stronger than the bottom half. And as we pivot towards the bottom left, UNC's region, I don't feel like there's a lot here in this region. You got a potential sleeper of whoever comes out of the 8-9 game. I think Mississippi State, Michigan State, Mississippi State guided by Josh Hubbard this season. Sparty, of course, always a force in March, even when their team doesn't look that great November through February. Don't want to count out Tom Izzo. St. Mary's is a 5 seed. I really like that team with Mitchell Saxon. I think they're going to the Sweet 16 this year because Alabama plays great offense. They play terrible defense, and I don't think that is a winning formula in the NCAA tournament. And then in the bottom part of this bracket is where I have my big upset. And Alec, you actually agreed on this one. Long Beach State, which is one of the craziest storylines in college basketball right now. They have Dan Monson, 17-year head coach, who they say they're going to mutually agree to part ways back on Monday. And then Long Beach State wins 4 straight, wins their conference tournament, and now goes against an Arizona team who was a overseeded 2 seed last year and lost to Princeton. And while Long Beach State might not be as talented as that Princeton group, the vibes are as good as ever. And they're coached by a guy who put Gonzaga on the map 25 years ago. I think this is the big upset of the NCAA tournament. And Long Beach State hands Arizona their 2nd consecutive 2-15 loss. You said the same thing in the overall bracket with Ellis. Why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's more so the fact that I don't like Arizona than me liking Long Beach State. I'm just not sold on Tommy Lloyd just yet. I was not sold. I was sold last year based on how that first season went, at least in the regular season, but then things have just gotten a little bit shaky this year. Caleb Love, as electric of a scorer as he can be, he's also very streaky and inconsistent. And if you catch him on a bad night, this offense is very beatable. I also think Keelan Boswell is a lot of the reason this Arizona team can stop or go. And I think if you catch both of them on a bad night, which, I mean, given the inconsistency of this Arizona team, Long Beach State very well could, then that could be a recipe for disaster. Now, I know it would be absolutely improbable to have a one team be a 2 seed 2 consecutive years and lose to a 15 seed in 2 consecutive years. But it just feels like, even though the players have swapped out, it feels like kind of a similar Arizona team to last year, where you just don't know if they can really have the firepower as much as they may have it on paper and in past games. I just don't know if they have it in March.
Now,
You're right. And
yeah,
I
go
like
ahead.
well, I was gonna say I like out of all the 215, I like that one. I will say though, in Arizona's credit, and I agree with everything you said, that Princeton team should not have been a 15 seed last year, right? And they just ran against a really, really strong 15 team. I understand Long Beach State is well coached, but they don't have the talent that Princeton had last year. So I think that's where Arizona gets a little bit of luck in that regard.
Now, I think another interesting dynamic of this region are the 2 Mountain West teams in the bottom half of the region. You've got the 10 seed Nevada, who I think has a very favorable draw, especially starting out against Dayton, who has no wins against the field and frankly did not have a great year. This team, of course, they missed out on their big chance 4 years ago with Obi Toppin. That team could have won a national championship. This team is not that quality. And then you got New Mexico, who just marched through and won the Mountain West Conference. Of course, Richard Pitino is the head coach of that team. And I think both of those teams have the potential, but I also like the Baylor Bears. And New Mexico, unfortunately, if they get the upset of Clemson, have to face Baylor in the second round. And as good as North Carolina is with RJ Davis and Armando Bacot, this team has shown its vulnerabilities over the last 2 years. They missed the tournament last year and they lose to NC State. Well, I know we're on a Cinderella run, but they still lose to them in the ACC championship. They have had a couple of questionable losses this year. I like Baylor. I actually have Baylor going all the way through with Arizona out, facing UNC in the Elite Eight, and making the Final Four. I think this Bears team has enough there to make that run, especially in this region, because I think this is the weakest region of the four. Alec, where do you go with this region? Do you think still UNC runs the table as the 1 seed?
I think it's going to be the Elite Eight of North Carolina and Baylor, which seems kind of chalk, especially with Arizona already out. I'm not really sure where to go with that game because I think UNC just has the guys to beat Baylor, but Baylor also they have the rugged experience in the Big 12. Scott Drew is a championship winning coach, and it's just tough to say where that game will go. They have the dynamic. They have pretty much dynamic players all over the place. Baylor does, but so does North Carolina. I think I would have to give Baylor just a barely an edge if that matchup were to play out in the Elite Eight. I just feel better about their offense in particular. But I mean, I would not be surprised if North Carolina runs the gauntlet in this West region that maybe doesn't have as much star power as some of the other regions.
And Ellis, who do you have coming out of this region? UNC?
I do have UNC still. I do what I had. Well, as you know, guys, because on my podcast I predicted Baylor losing earlier, so I didn't have them playing. If they played, I probably would take Baylor. Here's why: I think UNC, yeah, they're great, and I think, yeah, they're just really good. They got guard play. They're dynamic, but they get out physical sometimes, which is kind of funny when you're talking about a team with Armando Bacot. But they really do when they play the big boys that can keep up with RJ Davis's speed and put a body on him like a Jacoby Walter can. Now that RJ Davis becomes bad, but the point of attack starts faltering, and then UNC starts faltering because Cormac Ryan really isn't a creator himself. Elliot Cadeau is a creator, but he also can't shoot all that well, so you don't have to really step up on him. So I do have UNC coming out of the West, but I think if they do play Baylor, Baylor will win just because of Yavese Misi. Sorry if I said that wrong, but Jacoby Walter, right? These guys, they could punch. I don't know how well UNC can take a punch to the mouth, and I think Baylor could do that to them.
So let's go to the top right for the region that I think could have the most compelling games. So I think the most talented region is UConn in the East. I think the worst region is in the West. I think one of the more chaotic regions could be the Midwest in the bottom right. But the South region, I think, is going to have the best games. And the one that really sticks out to me is the 5-12 matchup right here. Wisconsin, who I was high on all year, I thought before they went in their February skid that they could be a team that can make a run to the Final Four because AJ Storr is that guy. Chucky Hepburn defensively is a stalwart. Max Klesmit was so clutch against Purdue on Saturday. You got Tyler Wall, who's been in that program for 5 years, and Stephen Crowell down low. That's one heck of a starting five. And they've had some emergence off the bench from some pieces. Johnny Blackwell, Kamari McGee, just to mention a couple who have played big minutes down the stretch, especially in that Big Ten tournament. But they get screwed. They're the 5 seed and they have to face one of the more talented 12 seeds, I think, in the last few years in the NCAA tournament, and that's James Madison. And that is a athletic program as a whole to me that has a chip on their shoulder from this entire year. The football team, people don't really care, not really respected, even though they keep winning games. They're fortunate that not enough teams ended up getting the 6 wins that they were even able to play in a bowl. And then this basketball team, the game with Michigan State early in the year, then they get forgotten about for most of the season, quietly go 31-3, absolutely dominate the Sun Belt tournament. Now they're the 12th seed and they have to go against a tough Wisconsin team. I think James Madison is the one team that's capable, maybe of any of the 12 seeds, to beat Wisconsin and then beat Kyle Filipowski and Duke in the next round and go to the Sweet 16. I just think they're that good. Separately, in this region, I think it's going to be all about Houston. Kentucky and Marquette are both really talented. I don't see either of those teams getting tripped up. Shaka Smart, he coaches good defense. He even plays good defense sometimes. He's going to do enough. John Calipari is going to make Kentucky find ways with that young group with Dillingham and Reeves. That team is more than talented enough for a Sweet 16 run. I think they get to the Elite Eight. but I think Houston gets past James Madison, gets past Kentucky, and that defense carries them all the way because they got a wake-up call. That loss to Iowa State may have been the best thing that happened to this team. They realized what they needed to adjust to become a true championship contender, and I think they're going to be ready after being held to 41 by the Cyclones, and that offense is going to improve, and that defensive unit, unwavering, number one in the country. I think the Cougars get out of this region, Alec, but I think we could get some interesting games, particularly that Wisconsin-James Madison matchup that could really go either way.
Yeah, the tough thing about this region, and I'm looking specifically at that 5-12 matchup, just like you were. James Madison is probably the most popular, or maybe tied for the most popular 5-12 upset pick. But I just feel like Wisconsin is playing much better than they were during that skid in February. And it feels like whenever there's these really popular upset picks, especially in the 5-12 range, it feels like the 5 seed sometimes will just come out and just play their best, and take down the 12 seed and kind of put those upset picks to bed. I guess the one of the main exceptions that comes to mind with that is, Murray State and Marquette. I mean, John Morant going up against Marcus Howard, that was the easiest 5-12 upset pick of all time. But I feel like Wisconsin has kind of come around. AJ Storr is playing some great basketball right now. It feels like they have got their synergy back. They looked horrific in the month of February. But this March run, maybe I'm putting a little bit too much stock in that Big Ten tournament run to the finals where they beat Purdue. I feel like they have found their mojo again. I think they can make Sweet 16. And that Houston matchup will be very interesting because Wisconsin, they are built on not turning the ball over, and they don't force a lot of turnovers either. Meanwhile, Houston's program, they are built on blitzing the ball handler, wreaking havoc in the backcourt. It's very interesting to see where that will go, and I think Wisconsin will make the Sweet 16 over Duke. And I feel like it's going to go mostly chalk. I think Colorado State's going to beat Boise State, or Colorado is going to beat Boise State in the first 4, and then Florida will win. I actually have the first round, for the first round at least, I have this region going all chalk. One of the upset picks I wanted to take was Vermont upsetting Duke in the first round, but I just don't think Vermont has that star power. I don't think as good of a job as John Becker has done with that program, I don't know if they're built to pick off those teams in March. But I think it's going to come down to either Kentucky or Marquette. Whoever wins that Sweet 16 matchup is going to the Final Four, in my opinion. And I want to give the slight edge to Kentucky right now. But if Tyler Kolek comes back looking like his old self, then I think Marquette could also go to the Final Four. But I think it's going to come down to that Kentucky-Marquette matchup for who goes to the Final Four out of the South region.
Interesting. I'm very high in the Kelvin Sampson defense. And my question with Kentucky is that young group. How disciplined can they stay the whole way? And Marquette, the health of Tyler Kolek, who hasn't played since February 28th, is supposed to be back for Friday's first round matchup with Western Kentucky. How good is he? How 100% is he moving forwards? I think Kentucky Marquette, definitely it boils down to them. But I think this region runs through Houston. Ellis, where do you have the South region going?
Kelvin Sampson's got to break through eventually, right? Like that's like his team is so good. But I do like about Wisconsin. I agree. Ultimately, I do agree. The region runs through Houston. What I do like about Wisconsin is, yeah, they have their man in AJ Storr, but all 5 guys can get a bucket, right? Max Klesmit today down the stretch was brilliant against Illinois, even though his team didn't win. Chucky Hepburn, I know Alec and my podcast mentioned how good of a defender he was, but he's also an underrated distributor. And when he gets cold a lot of times, but when he's on, that step back is deadly. Stephen Crowley saw the Big Ten tournament game, no longer hesitating to shoot threes. If he's a stretch big, like anyone can go off for Kentucky every night. And with Stephen Crowley shooting threes, their court spacing can be elite. So that's what I like about Wisconsin. When Wisconsin struggles, and they have struggled, especially in February, I don't really know what goes wrong. Like, it doesn't seem X's and O's to me, right? So that's why I like Wisconsin. It's a brutal. The South, as you said, Eddie, is brutal. And I do think that Houston's defense is too good, and their offense is overlooked because their defense obviously is not a top 5 offense in my opinion. But Jamal Shed and LJ Cryer are one of the most elite backcourts in the league, and Tugler also can scrap down low and get his putback points and stuff like that. So it's not the best offense in the world, but I think it's very good. And yeah, I think it runs through Houston, even though I'm very impressed with Wisconsin, James Madison. The South is really good. It's weird because Houston and UConn are the top 2 seeds. Yeah, I feel like they got screwed a little bit. They got the harder matchups. And I don't really know how that happened. It's very weird. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. If I was gonna name all four of the regions beside their regionality, which doesn't actually mean anything anymore where they play the games, the
Yeah.
East region is the dogs region. That is the legit contenders, and that region is stacked. The West region with UNC and company, that's the cupcake region. I think
Mhm.
this is the thrill region, the South region, because there's just going to be so many compelling matchups here and a lot of games that are going to go down to the wire. And in the bottom right, we'll finish here with what I think is the chaos region. You've got Purdue, which of course creates chaos to begin with, because the real question is, what is this team going to do? Last 3 years, losses to North Texas, St. Peter's, FDU in the NCAA tournament. Worst of all, last year, losing in the round of 64 as a 1 seed to a 16. I don't think that happens this year. I think Purdue wins a couple of games, but I don't see this team going to the Final Four. What I do see is Creighton going on a really good run. As the 3 seed, I think they're the sneaky strongest team in this tournament. Matt Painter and Rick Barnes, two great coaches, but two horrible coaches when it comes to the month of March historically. And for that reason, I really like Creighton to go on a run. I think all three Big East teams are going to be motivated after what happened with their conference mates not making it into the field, and all three of them make it easily to the Sweet 16. Creighton, I think, goes all the way to the Final Four. I have them actually winning this region, beating Purdue in the Elite Eight. A couple other surprises. I like Oregon for whatever reason. When they have those seasons where they're not that good and they have to win the Pac-12 tournament, they tend to win an NCAA tournament game too. And Dana Altman, I think, will prevail them against an overrated South Carolina team. My other big upset, and Ellis, you agreed with this on your podcast, Samford against Kansas, because Kansas's two best players are banged up in McCullough and Dickinson. Hunter Dickinson is exceptionally overrated. And while Samford lost by 50 to Purdue earlier in the season, they feel like that team that maybe could go on a little bit of a special run here against Kansas and then against a winner of a Gonzaga and McNeese game. And both of those teams are questionable as well. I think there's a real opportunity for Samford here, especially with a Kansas team that essentially load managed the Big 12 tournament because they didn't play McCullough or Dickinson. And I think that kind of maybe killed the vibe a little bit. They lose to Cincinnati. Maybe they'll be a little more energized here, but Kansas was really slipping even before that in a really good Big 12. I would not be shocked to see them lose early.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Then again, I mean, I totally agree with you, but this can backfire on us because Samford, they just don't, if Hunter Dickinson is close to 100%, Samford just, I'm such a hater of him, but they don't have anyone physical enough to deal with this Kansas team, which scares me that they're just going to be shot chucking threes. But if they get into a rhythm, if Kansas keeps them around just a little bit, the Samford team grows in confidence. You see them actually rushing in for rebounds. I'm still choosing the upset, but I can see one of these like, oh, hot trendy upset picks that Alec mentioned. It's very true. There's always 2 or 3 hot trendy upset picks where the top seeded team absolutely blows out the other team. I remember I was all over South Dakota State over Providence 2 years ago. Providence too lucky. South Dakota State is Baylor Shireman. They can shoot the 3 ball. They're actually underrated defensively, and Providence just made mincemeat of them. So I can see that happening for this. That said, I stick with my gut and I'm taking Sanford.
And Alec, looking at this region as a whole, is this the year Purdue finally makes the Final Four, or will Zach Edey's career come up short of the Final Four?
I know it's gonna sound like just being another Purdue hater and Zach Edey hater, but I'm gonna say no. And I'm trying to learn my lesson from last year where I was very out on UConn and predicted them to lose in the first round. I'm gonna try to reverse that trend with Kansas because Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson are supposedly coming back for the NCAA tournament. Ellis talked about it already. If Hunter Dickinson plays like his usual self, I don't think Samford stands a chance. I mean, they're one game against an at-large team. I believe their only game against an at-large team. They lost by 50 on the opening night. I think they also might. I think they played another game right after that against an NCAA tournament team, but that's not the point here. I think Kansas could be a sneaky team to get deep in this tournament. Honestly, they have played absolutely horrifically of late. Obviously, they just don't have that same level of consistency that past Bill Self teams do. But if Kevin McCullough and Hunter Dickinson come back, I mean, this was a Kansas team that was ranked in the top 5 for the better part of the first 3 months of the season. And I think if they get back to being healthy, They have some pretty good matchups. If they play McNeese or Gonzaga, I think they win either of those two games. And I think Hunter Dickinson against Zach Edey will go back to some of the old Big Ten matchups. I think Kansas could take that one, in all honesty. As good as Purdue has been this year, as much as of an improvement as they have had, aside from the last March, I think Kansas could make the Elite Eight, but I think Tennessee with Dalton Connect would take that Elite Eight matchup, and Tennessee would go to the Final Four for the first time under Rick Barnes. I just think maybe I'm going too far the other direction after my UConn take from last year, but I think Kansas could make a run here as a sneaky team that everyone is down on right now.
Interesting stuff, and I hope that we've helped inform your bracketology a little bit for those watching. Let's just finish with this quickly. Your guys' Final Four and championship picks. I'll start things off here. I got two Big East teams, two Big 12 teams to settle the score. I have UConn and Baylor. As I said, Baylor over UNC. I think UConn beats Baylor, though. I think that's a easy matchup for UConn to be able to win. So they return to the national championship game. On the right side of the bracket, as I said, Kelvin Sampson's Houston beats Kentucky, who beats Marquette. So Houston moves on to the Final Four. Bottom right, Creighton ends Zach Edey's college career in the Elite Eight. And it's the Blue Jays and Cougars in the Final Four. And I like Houston in a really close one to be able to out-scheme Creighton. UConn and Houston for the championship, and for the first time since the Billy Donovan Florida Gators. The Huskies make it back-to-back NCAA men's basketball champions. They win that game, I'd say, 70-58 to capture
Eddie,
a title. Yes.
Me and Palumbo, Lieutenant Palumbo, I don't know if he's been on the pod, but we will, if UConn wins, we will be so depressed. Because, by the way, I don't bet. I put like 6 bets in my entire life. One of those was back in like week 4 of the NFL season, or when was the second week of college basketball? Whatever that correlates to in the NFL season was UConn championship with San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl, $15 to win 600. And if UConn wins the national title, I wasn't upset about the 49ers because I knew they'd lose to the Chiefs. But if UConn wins the national title, I will get, for the first time, really upset about the Super Bowl and really mad at Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers for costing me $585. Anyway, that's a fun tidbit. I don't know if you knew, but I
did not. Very interesting. Very interesting. Alec, where are you going with your Final Four and champion?
All right, I'm going to go with, out of the East region, I'll give it to Iowa State. I think they shock UConn in the Elite Eight and move on to the Final Four and TJ Otzelberger's second year. I believe his second year, yeah. In the West region, I'm going to give it to Baylor. So two Big 12 teams meeting up in the Final Four. Next, I will give it to, in the Midwest, I'll give it to Tennessee. Out of the SEC, I think Purdue gets denied like we talked about before. And in the South region, I'm going to give it to Marquette. I think Tyler Kolek is back to his normal self. I think he can beat Houston in the Elite Eight. So that would mean Tennessee and Marquette matching up in the Final Four. It would be tough, but I think I would have to give it to, I'm really wrestling, Dalton Connect versus Tyler Kolek as the two best players on the floor. I think I would have to give it to Tennessee to move on to the national championship game. And then it would be between Baylor and Iowa State in a Big 12 matchup. I think I would give it to Iowa State. Let me check. I wonder how the season series went before I decide. I want to see how the season series went between Iowa State and Baylor. Because, I mean, of course, that could, the old adage in college basketball is always, it's hard to beat the team 3 times in the season. They already beat them by 14 in the Big 12 semifinals. They also lost to them by 2 at Baylor. And that was the only 2 matchups. So the season series is split right now. I think I would give it to Iowa State just because I think if they make it this far, that means their shots are falling down. And I think that just gives them the extra edge over Baylor. So I'm going to take an Iowa State versus Tennessee national championship game. I think Dalton Connect is going to drop a 35-piece in the national title game and give Rick Barnes and the Volunteers a national championship in men's basketball.
Interesting. So some very different looking. Baylor is the only consistency in both of our Final Fours. Ellis, we'll wrap with you, your Final Four and your NCAA champ.
Why not get Iowa State in there? I've loved this team since day one. I've watched enough of this team, and I know they can hang with UConn, and I'll predict them to beat UConn. Then they got Houston going out of the other team coming out of the Big 12. Kelvin Sampson gets over the hump. I like Alex's bracket because it's the second time I mentioned Sam Fetterman, but he's a great rule that says everyone's chokers until they're not. And Rick Barnes winning the NCAA tournament would prove that. But I don't have Rick Barnes and I don't have Purdue. I do have Creighton because I think Purdue and Creighton do match up in the Elite Eight. I'm pretty strong about that, and I think Creighton wins that because it's just not a good matchup for Purdue. In the West, I do have UNC. So I got UNC, Iowa State. I'll go Iowa State, and I got Creighton. I'll go Houston, and Houston gets the revenge over Iowa State and wins the NCAA tournament.
Interesting stuff.
Too.
Absolutely. And we'll see how it all shakes out. Appreciate Ellis Gordon, Alec Crouthamel joining us to help break things down. Also, Rahill Jaiswal earlier to look at NFL free agency. Next week, our MLB season preview. Tim Moore will be back for that one as well. He said he, quote, could not care less about the NCAA tournament. I don't know why he doesn't like March Madness, but I guess he's just a fun hater. But he'll be back next week. Reminder.
Doesn't he call basketball?
Yeah, but he doesn't like March Madness. I don't really get it. But it's okay. Yeah, interesting guy. Class act, though. That'll do it for this episode of Sports Speak Live. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at Sports Speak Live for more. And reminder, we are powered by SeatGeek. Use promo code SportsSpeak, all caps, one word, $20 off your first purchase. But I'm Eddie Kalegi signing off. Enjoy March Madness. We'll talk to you next week as we get you set for the 2024 Major League Baseball season.